Good morning. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome you to the conference Mining and Socio-economic Policy, Armenia's Choices. AUA is very pleased to be hosting this conference with the support of the United Nations Development Program and also USAID counterpart International Armenia. I'd like to say a few words at the beginning of the conference by remarking on the role of universities in public policy debates. At its foundation, public policy really is nothing more or nothing less than the collective action by a society or its government. Public policy is essential in order for society to act coherently. Good public policy advances the interests of everybody, and it makes the society's power and influence greater than that of the sum of its parts. Bad public policy, by contrast, can result in decisions that are costly and difficult to correct. It's sometimes challenging to detect whether public policy is good or bad because public policy tends to happen on very slow timescales. For this reason, academics study public policy very carefully to establish best practices, to learn from past successes and failures, and to apply all of our experience to make the best possible decisions in the future. The director of Michigan State University's Land Policy Institute, Soji Adelaja, has very eloquently pointed out that there is a tension, a necessary tension, between good public policy and free markets. Markets are exchange processes. Policy is a political process. Markets deal with private goods and services. Policy deals with public goods and services. Markets are driven by self-interest. Policy is driven by the public interest. In markets, business is the key institution. In policy, government is the key institution. In markets, the operating principles are efficiency, productivity, and growth. In policy, the operating principles are equity, societal power, justice, and fairness. For all of these reasons, the interface between business and public policy is complex and at times controversial. The tensions involved cannot be addressed in a balanced fashion, either by those representing purely business interests, nor by those representing purely policy interests. What is required is an unbiased third party with the capability of engaging in a complex decision-making process and with cross-disciplinary expertise. And this is where the role of the university in public policy debate becomes very important. Public policy related to mining, the topic of today's conference, involves issues of business, economics, law, engineering, public health, and environmental science. There are not many institutions with the cross-disciplinary expertise in all of these areas, but you are sitting in one right now. Universities bring together researchers from many different fields to work cooperatively to solve very difficult problems. Universities also have a mission to educate and the expertise to educate. And in the end, public policy issues are best resolved by educating the public. For all of these reasons, universities have become critically important in the shaping of public policy in the West, as is evidenced by the existence of many famous institutions, such as the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Mining or extraction industries more generally have a tendency to lead to very difficult public policy questions. While mining's environmental impacts in Armenia have been well documented, we feel that its socioeconomic impacts in Armenia have not been adequately explored in an academic forum, and that's the reason for today's conference. Here's the problem. Deposits of ores have been laid down by nature over geological timescales, billions of years. Mineral ores are therefore part of the patrimony of a country. They belong to all the generations that have ever lived and will ever live on a piece of land. It's therefore a very serious matter for one generation to decide to be the one that will remove that patrimony from the ground and exploit it as a resource. Such a decision is neither obviously right nor obviously wrong. To those who would say that mining is obviously wrong, there is the example of Botswana. Since its independence in 1966, Botswana has had the highest average growth rate in the world, averaging about 9% per year over decades. And the foundation of that growth was diamond mining. But the revenues from those mines were managed wisely, with prudent fiscal policies and ultimately shared by the entire population of the country. Botswana is rated as the least corrupt country in Africa by Transparency International. Its standard of living today is comparable to that of Mexico or Turkey, and it has world-class free education and healthcare systems. To those who would say that mining is obviously the right thing to do, perhaps because it generates jobs, there is the example of the OKTedi mine in Papua New Guinea. OKTedi is an open-pit copper and gold mine which reduced an entire mountain to a hole in the ground, and because of a flawed environmental impact plan, tailing pool dams collapsed, and the operators now discharge about 80 million tons of tailings, overburden, and mine-induced erosion into the river system each year. These discharges have caused enormous harm, both environmentally and socially, to the 50,000 people who live in the 120 villages downstream from the mine. Chemicals from the tailings have killed or contaminated fish, which are still eaten by the people of these villages. The riverbed was raised 10 meters, causing it to be more shallow and develop rapids, thereby disrupting transportation systems in the country. Contaminated mud covered agricultural fields downstream from the mine, resulting in lost agricultural revenues. Meanwhile, a 2010 report by Human Rights Watch found that Papua New Guinea's national revenues from its extractive industries, including the OKTedi mine, had been widely dissipated because of official corruption without leaving any discernible positive impact on the wider population. The net effect of the mine economically, therefore, was very negative. So it can go both ways. Before I finish my introductory remarks, allow me to just change the subject somewhat. I'd like to share with you, well, as an educator, I cannot resist sharing with you really the content of the following slide, which comes from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So you may have difficulty seeing this, but I'll explain to you what it is. The OECD made a data map of countries plotting the percentage of GDP derived from extraction industries on the horizontal axis versus the students' performance on the PISA exam, the Program for International Student Assessment, on the vertical axis. The green lines that you see both horizontally and vertically are the mean values. The OECD concluded that there is a significant negative relationship, as they put it, between the money that countries extract from natural resources and the knowledge and skills of their high school population. Basically, countries with more extraction industries tend to have worse educational systems. To quote Mr. K.R. Sridhar, who is the founder of the Silicon Valley fuel cell company, Bloom Energy, he said, when you don't have resources, you become resourceful. But whatever the reason, the trend on this diagram is unmistakable. Taiwan, which has almost no extractable resources whatsoever, has the best secondary educational system in the world. Armenia is approximately here. Its percentage of its revenue that it derives from extraction industries is still well below the mean internationally. but its secondary educational system is above mean. Azerbaijan, by contrast, is here. The percentage of its GDP that it derives from extraction industries, as you might expect, is very large. Its secondary school education system falls somewhat below the mean. In fact, only 3 countries in the world manage to be in the upper right quadrant. Australia, Norway, and the Russian Federation are the only 3 countries that are above average in both of those means. So the negative correlation is very strong. By contrast, there are 18 countries clustered together with below average educational systems, even though they're well above average in extraction industries, meaning that they certainly have all the money that they need to throw at educational system quality, but they're not doing it. Now, you have to be careful about concluding anything from this. Correlation does not imply causation. It does, however, suggest perhaps common causation, and that can sometimes be difficult to avoid. So if Armenia were to increase the percentage of its GDP due to extractive industries, what is it more likely to do? Is it more likely to follow the example of Australia, Norway, and the Russian Federation and sit in the upper right of this picture, or is it more likely to follow the example of the 18 countries in the lower right of the picture? This, of course, is a rhetorical question. Nobody knows the answer to that. The answer will surely depend on the level of regulation, transparency, fairness, with which Armenia's mineral resources are mined. It's a question, going back to the beginning of my comments, it's a question of public policy. It's the kind of question that can be examined very effectively in an academic setting, and that will be examined by today's conference. We hope that this conference will be the beginning of a more sustained platform for policy discussions of this sort in the future in an academic setting. Again, I'd like to give my thanks to UNDP and Counterpart International Armenia for their support of this event. I hope you enjoy this conference, and I hope that the discussions here today will contribute to creating sound public policy with regard to mining in Armenia. I would like to thank you very much and introduce you to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Patrice Curbizo, who is the new head of UNDP in Armenia. Mr. Curbizo arrived in Armenia to take up his duties in October of this year. Prior to that, he was the UN resident coordinator and UNDP resident representative in India from 2009 to 2012. And prior to that, from 2005 to 2009, he had a similar position in the Maldives. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Patrice Curbizo from UNDP. Thank you.